In this video, I'm going to share with you my application for the Mellon New Directions Fellowship. I was honored by winning a Mellon New Directions Fellowship, and I'd like to share what I learned along the way, and I'd like to share a copy of my successful application, which I'm going to provide a link for in this video. The first question you're going to need to answer for yourself is what your new direction is going to be, or what you're going to propose. And in particular, the question you need to ask is, how far away from my current intellectual position is this new direction going to be? Let's say for myself, I'm an historian of China, Asia, and technology. So is my new direction going to be law? Is it going to be medicine? Is it going to be computer engineering and programming? Is it going to be another language in the sense of another spoken language or written language that I want to learn? And depending upon which one I propose, there is either going to be a very short distance from my current skill set and the one I'm proposing to acquire, or an extremely large one. And here I think you need to strike a balance. In my view, if you propose a new direction that is extremely close to your current direction, it stands to reason that the fellowship committee might think, well, this person could kind of do this anyway. Why do they need our help? So in my case, if I had proposed to study the Korean language or to sort of brush up on my Japanese language skills as my new direction, or if I had said, I'm an historian, but I want to go in the new direction of literary studies, a fellowship committee might think reasonably, well, chances are you studied Japanese in grad school when you were pursuing your history PhD in Chinese history, so this isn't really a new direction. It's kind of your current direction. And yes, it's good you want to fortify that skill set, but it's not a new area. And likewise, literary scholars and historians share a lot in common. More and more and more, literary studies is like a quasi-historical discipline, given how much historical methodology, or at least sort of approaches, actually inform that scholarship. And so for an historian to venture into literary studies as a new direction is a little bit like not bold enough. However, at the same time, there is a risk of proposing something which goes too far. Now, I'm just speaking as one person. I've never sat on the review committee for one of these, so I don't have any insider information. This is just my sense and what was going through my mind as I applied. But if I were to propose, I am going to get a medical degree, or I'm going to learn aeronautical engineering, this is so far away from my current set of abilities that a fellowship committee or review committee should, if they see something like that, ask themselves, is it actually possible for a person in the span of time covered by this fellowship to acquire that new of a direction? I mean, aeronautical engineering is something that people spend, their entire high school, undergraduate, PhD lives learning, and then of course a profession practicing. So what does it mean that I want to do like a little bit of intensive training in something that far away from me? So I think that it's really important that you propose something which is bold, which is a new direction, honestly, but that somehow is consonant or within striking distance, let's say, of where you are now. That's the first thing that you want to think about. The second thing you want to think about brings us back to this idea of the Mellon as a career level grant. Now, the new direction that you propose obviously should have some connection with the research that you plan to do in your career, from here on out. Maybe not every project, but certainly, where you are going in your career should benefit from this new direction, this new foundation, this new skill set. However, the Mellon New Directions is not a dissertation write-up grant or a travel grant. It is not about the production of one research product that comes out of it. It has to do, again, with some sort of broader career level aspiration. So it's very, very weird, like how you write such an application. On the one hand, you do need to make reference to the kinds of research projects for which this new direction would be critical, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you are not writing your fellowship application as if it were a project grant. And you can kind of understand why this would be. This is a mid-career grant. It's about venturing into new areas. It's not just about getting the skills you need to get one book done. Because in a sense, that's not big enough. They presumably want to fund something that is going to kind of shape a good number of future projects, if perhaps not everything you do from here on out in the rest of your career. So this is, again, this balancing act when you write such a document to figure out how you strike this balance. Because if you go too far in the project direction, you're writing it in the wrong way. You're writing it as again, a travel grant, something like that. But if you just lose sight of a project and then you just write, I would really love to learn how to cook, I would really become a chef with French cuisine or Vietnamese cuisine. That's just something I want to do. It has nothing to do with any goals of mine professionally. I just think it'd be really amazing to, learn X, Y, or Z. Well, this fellowship, quite obviously, is not just about the ego-driven desire to acquire skill and acquire this kind of social capital, the intellectual capital. It has to have a direction to it. So the second piece here is you have to write it in such a way that strikes a balance between these two elements of it, which, oddly enough, are in a contradictory relationship with one another. The third thing, which I always recommend, but especially for a grant of this nature, is to get hold of models. Once again, you can go on the Mellon website. You can find the names of recent or past, distant past recipients of this, and just scroll and see if you recognize anyone in that list. Maybe an old friend from grad school who you haven't talked to in a long time. Or do you recognize any institutions? Is someone at your current institution or somewhere that you studied for your PhD or your undergraduate, did someone from one of those institutions win this fellowship? Either of those circumstances gives you, in my view, the green light to write a polite email acknowledging that this is an awkward request and that you certainly understand if they don't feel comfortable sharing, but you're applying for this fellowship. You saw that they are a past recipient. Is there any chance that in confidence they'd be willing to share their application with you? I did this with two colleagues and kind of old friends who I saw had won this fellowship. Both of them were kind enough to share their fellowships applications with me, and they were totally different from one another, but they gave me some sense, a touchstone with which to think through, okay, now I get the general ballpark of where I need to be. Okay, now how am I going to do it in my own way? So of course you never want to crib, you never want to plagiarize, because that serves nobody, but it is good to know, okay, I'm in the ballpark now. Now that is the application process itself, but I want to give a few more tips. What happens if you land this grant, and that you need to actually have a bit of optimism and think ahead to what happens if I actually do land this? Well, one thing is you're going to need to apply to whatever program you listed through which you plan to acquire this new skill set or to go in this new direction. So in my case, I proposed in my application, as you'll see when you get the download link, I wanted to basically pursue the equivalent of a master's in fine arts in design with a focus on type design. And this is connected to work that I've done on writing technology, but also one that I'm working on called Hot Metal Empire. I won't go into that. But even with the application to the Mellon, you either land the Mellon or you don't land the Mellon. But if you do land the Mellon, you still need to apply to, in my case, design programs. In my case, there was one in The Hague. There was another one in New York. There's another one in the United Kingdom. There's another one here in California. And they're under no obligation to say yes to you. And in fact, from their perspective, you're going to be a little bit weird or even undesirable because the people applying to their program are your counterparts. But like instead of being a PhD or a student of history, they are students and practitioners of design. It's a deadly serious thing that they're doing. And here I am kind of like, hey, I'd love to come, and I'm pretty good at drawing. And they have to ask themselves, do we want this weird guy from Stanford in our classes when everybody else in the program is a serious hardcore X, Y, or Z. And this is true if you're applying for something that has to do with law or medicine or engineering or whatever it might be. You have to kind of think ahead and think, maybe I should get in touch with the program coordinator, tell them about the Mellon New Directions, ask them, how feasible is this? Would they be open to something like this? Don't leave that to the last minute, because you don't want to get in a situation where you land the Mellon and then no one will accept you. Another piece on that front is, even if the program accepts you, like you land the Mellon, you get into whatever program you're going to get into, I want to give you a kind of word of warning that you should be prepared to be the oddball out, the sort of odd fella in the room, and you're just going to have to figure out how to deal with that. If you're like me and you have, finished the schooling part of your life and you've gone through all of those hurdles, the times in which you are kind of vulnerable or at risk or feel like a student again, which is exciting but also really nerve-wracking, are long gone. The last time I was in a room where I wasn't a colleague or like the professor or the speaker or someone with like authority in the room has been a long time. And so I step into this room in this design program, and I am by far the most junior, immature, unskilled person in the entire room. I like that feeling personally, but I won't lie that it's a big shock when you have come to this point in your career and you kind of have forgotten what that feels like. Now, for the most part, this is a wonderful experience. I think people really appreciate when people can kind of return to the life of the student, can return to humble themselves and be like, I might know this one area really well, but in this other area, everyone in this room is my teacher by a long shot. I don't mean in that sort of general sense, like I learn more from my students, blah, blah, blah. I mean, quite literally, every single person in that room knew like 10,000 times more than me about this subject. At the same time, there are, or could be, and you might experience in these really awkward moments. Like I remember arriving at class one night. There were evening classes because it was an intensive program in San Francisco, but it was also for people who were practicing designers, so they had to work during the day. So the program was in the evening. I remember racing through traffic, trying not to kill myself to get there in time. I didn't want to disrespect the instructors. My family and I were going through this crazy housing crisis. We had an infant at home and completely stressed. Got to the building, found a parking spot, got into the elevator, got up there, and I was like right on time. I walked in, I was like, okay, I didn't disrespect the instructor, because I don't like being disrespected as an instructor. What does the instructor say? Oh, nice of you to show up. Oh, or something like this. Oh, the Stanford professor is here. Nice of you to show up. And there were like 25 faces looking at me, and I was just like mortified, just fucking mortified. And I just stayed the rest of that session in total silence. It's just a totally humiliating moment. The instructor later apologized for it. It turned out this is like a really stupid thing to do as an instructor, but the clock in the room was wrong. And so he thought he was accurate in condemning me when I walked in the room, but he was wrong. But in any event, by the way, if you're an instructor, don't do that. Just even if the person is a little bit late. But in any event, it's true that the entire program, even after that apology and sort of trying to get back on page one, never really got there. And maybe that's just the way it is. Like when you go back to being a student, when you choose to jump back in the pool where you are totally absolute beginner at something, you're going to have to deal with it. There are going to be people who wonder, why the hell are you there? There are going to be people for whom your presence in the room kind of diminishes it, as if it's kind of a fun workshop, when for them it's serious. It's like the next level for them, and you just got to be respectful of that. It actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it. They are training to be doctors, they're training to be lawyers, they're training to be designers or engineers, and you're exploring new directions. So keep that in mind, take it with a grain of salt. The pluses far outweigh the minuses, but of course, every now and then someone's going to treat you shittily, and you're just going to have to figure out how to deal with it. Now, some good things here is that there is flexibility in the program. Eventually, after the first portion of that intensive class in the city, I needed to, because of life situation, I needed to find a different teaching relationship. And I was able to set up a basically a one-on-one intensive directed reading tutorial with a practicing and really influential type designer that involved, practice and theory and history and so forth. And both my university and the Mellon were entirely fine with that. As long as you are achieving your objective, then if life changes on you and you need to change the program that you are in, pursuing this new direction, there is, in my experience, flexibility in the model. Now, the last piece, I think, is probably the most important one because it has to do with how we should live life, I think. If you are fortunate enough to land the Mellon New Directions, and if you're fortunate enough to get accepted into a program where you can be alongside, pros and learn whatever this new direction is, it is incumbent upon you to actually put it into practice after all of this is over. Use it or lose it. There's nothing more depressing in life than studying a language for however many years and then just never using it, never speaking it, or learning an instrument and then never playing it. An institution has given you, as opposed to someone else, a healthy chunk of money and time and this one-of-a-kind experience, this one-of-a-kind opportunity, and it is incumbent upon you to really make the most of it through the rest of your career. It doesn't mean every book you write or every project you do has to use that new direction, that new skill, but I think it's really incumbent upon you and upon me, just putting it back on my shoulders, to make the most of this amazing opportunity. Okay, for those of you who managed to stick around, I'm going to give you a download link where you can get a full copy of my successful Mellon New Directions Fellowship application. Take a look at it, use it as a centering thing, like where in the ballpark are we? Don't plagiarize because it doesn't do anyone any good. But I always benefit from models, and I'm a big believer in sharing anything of mine that has succeeded in the past. So you can head there and get a copy of it, and I would love to hear what you think of it. And of course, if you got something out of this video, please consider giving a like. That means a whole lot for me in this video. Above all, consider subscribing, and if so inspired, leave a comment. I will see you in the next video.